commercial functions and afford the Department of Defense options to reduce the cost of providing those services, those products and services. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Guam rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim the time in opposition, and I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman may state his inquiry.
Mr. Chairman, I wish to reserve the balance of my time. Oh, did I reserve the balance of my time?
Gentleman had yielded back.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to reserve the balance of my time.
Without objection.
To reclaim my time.
Without objection. It's ordered.
Thanks.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Guam is recognized for 5 minutes.
For 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yes. As the ranking member on readiness, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment, Mr. Speaker. The amendment flies in the face of the total force management provisions adopted by Congress on a bipartisan basis in last year's defense bill and supported by the sponsor of this amendment. Defense Secretary Panetta has stated he is committed to promoting and facilitating improved total force management that is requirements-based and delivers the appropriate mix of civilian, military, and contracted support. The amendment does not simply lift the A-76 moratorium, as the author suggests. I would note that our committee, on a bipartisan basis, rejected an amendment to lift the moratorium by a bipartisan 25 to 36 vote. This amendment simply guts how the Department of Defense manages its personnel and reduces oversight of many contracted functions. The amendment is contrary to the bipartisan consensus that this Congress has forged in how DOD should and can manage its personnel. So I'm asking do not vote on lifting the A-76 moratorium. Say no to this amendment. And I urge my colleagues to oppose it. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time.
Balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are three principal changes that this amendment makes to current law. One is it states that new functions that the Department of Defense enters into as far as having requirements, contract requirements, can be done by the private sector. It doesn't say shall be done by the private sector. It merely gives the Department of Defense an option, a tool to save money. Functions that have been performed by the Department of Defense civilians for the past 10 years, irrespectively whether they're done cost effectively or not. Again, it doesn't say that the Department of Defense has to outsource these functions. It says that they may, based on whether or not it's a cost-effective option. Expansion of existing functions performed by Department of Defense civilians. Again, if in fact there's additional requirements laid on, something that's currently done by civil service employees, current law says we have to only accomplish it through civil service employees. This gives them the option.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from Guam is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Hawaii, Mrs. Hanabusan.
Gentlewoman from Hawaii is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I rise in opposition to the Kaufman amendment. Under the guise of efficiency, this is really an assault on federal civilian workforce. The Kaufman amendment is based on the misguided belief that private contractors are less costly and more efficient. In other words, outsourcing and privatization should be the way we go, when in fact the insourcing of the work has been proven to be more efficient. POGO, the Project on Government Oversight, said that the private contractors get paid about 1.83 times, almost twice more than the government pays its employees. In fact, government pay is less in all of the 35 categories that they reviewed. The amount spent on civilian personnel grew from fiscal year 1 to 10 from about 41 to 69 billion. In the same time frame, private sector grew 73 to 181 billion. But more importantly than that, the Army has said insourcing saves them 16 to 30%. So we hear now today that this is what we want to give to the Secretary of the Defense. Leon Panetta says he wants to uphold the policy of the total force management, that there is an appropriate mix of civilian, military, and private. And what we need to do is let that continue. So this amendment is not supported by the facts. It's not even supported by the Department of Defense. It is clearly an attempt to just support the private sector on the back of federal employees. And for that reason, I ask everyone to vote no. I yield back to
Gentlewoman from Hawaii
Guam.
yields back the balance of her time. The gentlewoman from Guam is recognized for just 2 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I have 2 minutes.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I can speak from firsthand experience. The A-76 program was a pilot program on in the territory of Guam a few years ago. I served as Lieutenant Governor at the time, and I will say this for the record, that this program was a dismal failure, and that's what we experienced. The Department of Defense has found insourcing to be very effective, and it's an effective tool for the department to rebalance the workforce, realign inherently governmental and other critical work to government performance from contract support, and in many instances to generate resource efficiencies. So again, I'm saying that we should vote no on this amendment. Lifting the A-76 moratorium would be a sad mistake on our part, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 18, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 18, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Keating of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the important debate to save National Guard units, we made some steps forward in this bill and unfortunately also took steps backward. Many in the chamber may assume that all the National Guard unit issues were resolved in the markup of this bill, but that's simply not the case. A vital and unique group of Air National Guard units, known as CNAFs, have a full-time mission to support active duty bases. These augmentation units take on a large chunk of the workload while only accounting for a small percentage of the mission's workforce. And the work is all done domestically. In and of itself, that provides a higher degree of security because there are discrete sites that are isolated and more easily secured here in the United States. These units were created because they are cost-effective, and eliminating them will result in unfinished business, displaced cost, and perhaps the most alarming of all consequences, endangered lives. To illustrate, the 102nd Air Operations Group at Otis National Guard Base works 24/7, 365 days of the year to conduct 30% of the Air Force Global Strike Command surveillance mission and only accounts for 10% of the command's workforce. 30% of the mission, 10% of the command workforce. The 102nd Air Operation Group's counterpart at Barksdale Air Base in Louisiana rely on these great men and women to examine real-time footage and spot out threats. When I talk about consequences, including the endangering of lives, the work of this unit has helped our servicemen and women avoid concealed insurgents on the battlefield and tracks the proliferation of nuclear weapons as these events are occurring. It has the backs of our soldiers in the field, and affords its own level of defense against nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, the Air Force is only now realizing the impact of this loss. I apologize for all the acronyms that are here, but I wanted to take the actual slide from the Air Force presentation. This slide is from May 2nd, and it's an Air Force briefing to Lieutenant General Herbert Carlisle, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations for the Air Force, and it proves that units like the 102nd AOG are essential. According to this slide, which is only 2 weeks old, the 102nd Air Operations Group is, quote, essential to the U.S. Strategic Command's time-sensitive planning mission, unquote, and the impact of losing this unit will render the Air Force, quote, unable to fully support extended time-sensitive scenarios, unquote. Furthermore, the Air Force reiterates that without the 102nd Air Operations Group, the mission of the Global Strike Command will not be supported, and the Rapid Assessment Team currently in place at Barksdale cannot take on more surveillance duties without the 102nd AOG. But perhaps the most glaring piece of information on this slide is in the last line, which simply states that the National Guard Bureau did not coordinate this cut with U.S. Stratcom or the Global Strike Command or the 8th Air Force. Mr. Chairman, clearly, even the Air Force knows that a big mistake was made with the decision to eliminate these Guard units. My amendment simply freezes cuts to the Air National Guard units to support the Air Force until the impact of the unit's loss is determined and reported to Congress. This language leaves room to sort out the units that are essential to our national security and cut where duplicative missions exist. For these reasons, I urge all my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment, and, Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I rise, Mr. Chairman, to claim the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to my friend and colleague, the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Readiness, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to say to my friend on his amendment that we share his love for the Guard across this body. I think most of our members in here recognize the great job they do day in and day out for us. That's why I want to also say how much we appreciate the Chairman's work and the ranking member's work to make sure in this bill that they have raised and saved many of our Guard priorities and looking in there and doing that. And I wish we'd been able to save everything in this bill, but friends on the other side have criticized us for the extra money we've put in already. And one of the things that you realize, Mr. Chairman, is at times you just do have to make an allocation. And in this particular situation, the National Guard Bureau actually looked and said, we want to save and prioritize our UAV mission because we think that's higher than headquarters functions. And that's what they did. They made a priority assessment on that it was more important for us to save the UAV missions, which they did, and not headquarters operations. I also realize, as the gentleman does, that we'd like to each preserve these Guard units in our own area, but the Department of Defense just felt that that wasn't possible. They opposed this amendment. And, Mr. Chairman, I would say, if you have to make the choice between protecting our headquarters units and protecting missile defense, I think that's an easy decision for us. We want to make sure we're continuing to protect missile defense. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back, and I hope that we'll vote against this amendment.
The gentleman from Virginia yields back. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Forbes for his commitment and support for the Air National Guard, and also Chairman McKeon. But this amendment is not about the National Guard or the Air National Guard or even, how are we going to support our Guard. This amendment is about cutting missile defense. If you look at the amendment, it looks to take money from our national security, specifically in the area of our missile defense. Now, this is one of a series of amendments that are coming across from the other side of the aisle that are attempting to cut missile defense. Now, this occurs at a time when Iran and North Korea continue to increase as a threat to our country. Secretary Gates even said as he was departing, North Korea is rising to the level of being a threat to the mainland of the United States, missile defense becoming that much more important. And coincidentally, as we know, this also comes in the heels of the President having what people know as an open mic event, where the President was caught surprised that his mic was open so that the American people could hear a conversation that he was having with President Medvedev, where he said that he would have greater flexibility after the election, his last election, and he would have a greater flexibility to deal with the issue of missile defense. Now, the President, in his secret deal with the Russians, has not yet told us what it is that he would lessen in our missile defense, but I know that as we look to these amendments, they are consistent with the issue of, do we have a strong missile defense? Do we not have a strong missile defense? Do we follow the President's lead of a weakening of our national defense and our missile defense? On this side of the aisle, I think the American people believe that we need a strong missile defense. We need to make certain that we're protecting our homeland and we're protecting our mainland. Now, I asked the White House, I asked the President if they would tell us what was in this secret deal that they had with the Russians, and they did respond to me in a letter of April 13th, as the Ranking Member Smith mentioned, and with unanimous consent. I'd like to enter this into the record. This letter does not say at all that there is any terms that the White House is willing to discuss, but it does say this sentence. It says, "It's no secret that this effort will be more complicated during election years." Even in writing and in the open miking event, the President says that after this election he'll have more flexibility, meaning that he can't stand in front of the American people and tell us what his plans are for missile defense, or it could affect his election, meaning the electorate themselves would not support what this President wants to do with missile defense. I know the electorate would not support this Keating Amendment. It is important that we have a strong missile defense as we look to Iran and North Korea. And this ground-based mid-course defense system that they want to cut in this amendment is the only one that we currently have that protects mainland United States. The CE-1 interceptor has been tested and is 3 for 3 in its success. This is a system that works, that we need to make certain that we continue, and it certainly is one that I know the American public support and want us to continue. I reserve the balance for time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have remaining?
Gentleman from Massachusetts and the gentleman from California each enjoy 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't be presumptuous enough to tell me my motivations. We look for many pay-fors in this plan. What we have is plain and simple. We have an enhancement of a security for our country because we have a plan that works and that will save lives and help us resolve missile defense issues by tracking them versus a pay-for that we located that was $400 million over budget, and I only took 9% of that, leaving 91% of that intact, because I think this trade-off enhances our security.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
How much time?
30 seconds.
I yield the balance of the time to Mr. Turner from Ohio.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 30 seconds.
The gentleman states that his amendment only takes 9% for missile defense. Now, that's this, the gentleman stepping forward and saying what's in his amendment. The President, however, won't tell us how much he wants to cut from missile defense as he goes through this election cycle with the secret deal that he has for the Russians. But the one thing that we know, this system stands ready to defend the United States. It is necessary. Iran and North Korea continue to increase their threat to the United States. This system deserves our funding. It deserves the funding that's in this bill. This amendment should be defeated.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I request a call of the yeas and nays.
Gentleman requests a recorded vote?
Yes.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 19, printed in House Report 112485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 19, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is very straightforward. It would simply allow individuals of any age to enlist in the military so long as they were able to meet all of the requirements to ensure that they are fit for duty. Under current law, only individuals who are 42 years of age or younger are allowed to enlist in the military. This seems to be an arbitrary number. As we can all probably attest, there are some 20-year-olds that cannot run a mile. Yet there's a growing number of middle-aged men and women who are extremely physically fit and who, whether due to family, work, or other obligations, were unable to enlist when they were younger. I've heard from some of these individuals. Mr. Chairman, they are competitive runners, triathletes, and general fitness enthusiasts. I dare say they are stronger and fitter than many younger people, and they have an added benefit of life experience and maturity. And yet, when they attempt to use these skills to serve their country, the military tells them, "We don't want you. You're too old." Not long ago, I heard from a man who is in just this situation. He is a competitive ultra-marathoner. The picture of health, who after starting a family and establishing a career, decided he was finally able to realize his dream of serving in his country's military. Unfortunately, he was told that he was just a few months too old. As a result, he could not enlist. While stories like this gentleman are compelling, there are other lost potentials to consider also. One of our colleagues, my good friend and the gentleman from my home state of Georgia, Dr. Phil Gingrey, has experienced a similar issue. He's not trying to serve in combat. He's not trying to get a military retirement. He simply wants to serve his country using his training as a medical doctor. He went to enlist in the Navy Reserve, and to his surprise, he was told that he was too old, even as the need for good medical doctors in the military ranks continues to grow. We should allow people like Dr. Gingrey to enlist in the military. My amendment would do just that. We'll hear a number of members on the floor today who are expressing concern about the multiple tours that so many of our men and women in uniform have had to serve, often back-to-back over many years. I share this concern, and I believe that if we were to lift this age restriction, we could open up the military to a new population of strong, capable individuals who, in many cases, have finished their education and their careers and have seen their children grow into adulthood. Many of them aren't seeking military retirement, but rather have advanced in their careers, put away enough for retirement, and are ready for a new challenge. I urge my colleagues to support this common-sense amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I claim the time in opposition and use such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by my colleague from Georgia, Mr. Brown. I understand his belief that anyone who qualifies, regardless of age, should be able to serve. However, serving in the United States military is a difficult and a challenging profession, especially as one gets older in years. The Department of Defense does not support this amendment. Current law allows enlistments up to age 42. However, all of the service's current policies have restricted enlistment to a lesser age, with the Army at the maximum age of 35. Mr. Chairman, we are currently drawing down the force, and recruiting conditions do not require this proposal. Even during the most difficult recruiting environment at the peak of national emergency, only the Army exercised the authority and raised its age limit to 42. This policy was only in place for a few years, and the Army has since reinstated its old policy of a maximum of 35 years of age because the risks and the challenges of training older recruits outweigh the minimal gain. What the Army found was that older level recruits tend to have greater health and physical ailments, especially when deployed, and once injured, these individuals face a longer period of recuperation. Mr. Chairman, this amendment is not needed and counterproductive to recruiting young men and women into the armed forces, and I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
Gentleman has 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm 66 years of age. I'm in the United States Navy Reserve today, an active reservist as a medical doctor, general medical officer. There are many reservists, not only in the Navy but in other branches of the service, that are beyond 42 years of age. We have critical need for doctors, lawyers, veterinarians, dentists, other specialties in our military, even as we turn down the size of our forces. And I think it's critical to have the ability for people who want to serve, who are fiscally fit, who can meet all the requirements to be able to do so. That's all this amendment does. It does not waive any physical requirements. It does not waive anything that's out there today for someone to enlist. It's just going to utilize people who have the capability of serving to allow them to do so. And not doing so is actually discriminating against them just because they have celebrated a few birthdays. I mentioned in my first comments about an ultra-marathoner that the military actually wanted, but because this guy was in better shape than most people after they leave boot camp that are in their 20s. The Army wanted him, but because he was just a couple of months too old, the law would not allow him to enlist. So he would have served this nation very admirably, wanted to serve, was fiscally fit, was capable of doing anything that a 20-year-old is capable of doing today, and my amendment would allow him, as well as Dr. Gingrey, to serve. And Dr. Gingrey is in good physical condition. He just wants to go utilize his medical experience and provide medical services to our men and women in uniform, and he should be allowed to do so also. So I encourage my colleagues to vote for my amendment and accept this.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 1 minute to Mr. Wilson of North Carolina, the chairman of the Personnel Committee.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 moment. 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. As a 31-year veteran of the Army Reserves and National Guard, I fully appreciate the need for age limitation. What we ask our young men and women to do is nothing short of incredible. The physical and mental toughness that is instilled in them as they enlist is something that becomes more challenging over time. I appreciate the efforts of the gentleman from Georgia that there are exceptions, and I applaud those who maintain a high level of physical fitness and desire to serve their country. But that is only the one requirement that the military provides. I know firsthand that age limitation will expand opportunities for younger service members to serve in command positions. I urge defeat of this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from California.
Thank you. I yield 1 minute to Dr. Heck, who is a medical doctor in the Army Reserve and also a member of the Personnel Committee.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I, too, rise in opposition to the amendment. Like my colleague from Georgia, I am also an active reservist and a physician in the military. You know, we are fortunate that we now have an all-volunteer force. Indeed, we are blessed that we have such capable men and women that are willing to put on the uniform. But as we start to have a drawdown, as we start to go through total force management, we want to make sure that we keep opportunities for those that are the brightest, the most capable, and the fittest for the longest period of time. I can tell you that being a physician in the reserves is a lot different than enlisting in the active duty force. And going through initial entry training, military occupational specialty training, is a very rigorous course of instruction. As a physician, I have concerns. I think that while well-intended, the secretaries already have the ability to grant waivers for exigent circumstances and when in the best interest of the Department of Defense, and that this amendment is not required. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Ask for a recorded vote for the ayes and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. Now, in order to consider Amendment number 20, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 20, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Carson of Indiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Carson, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment, which CBO has determined will have no impact on direct spending or appropriations, seeks to address an issue that I believe is preventing many of today's service members from pursuing mental health and addiction treatment that they so desperately need. Quite simply, it prevents promotion boards from considering any other source of information from official documents, word of mouth, any source about the pursuit of treatment for mental health or addiction issues. The amendment provides necessary exceptions for individuals who are determined by a physician to be a danger to themselves or others, would be unable or unfit to accomplish the duties of higher rank, or if they give consent to consideration for such information. And lastly, I believe, most importantly, the amendment requires the Department of Defense to inform current service members about these prohibitions. As we all know, Mr. Chairman, mental health issues like PTSD and depression are the signature wounds of our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, unfortunately, we have entered these wars with an outdated military culture that stigmatized mental health issues and often equated pursuing treatment with weakness. Mr. Chairman, we have made amazing progress since then, and I applaud the Department of Defense and the Armed Services Committee for their efforts. Yet, I still hear from service members who are afraid that pursuing mental health treatment will negatively impact their prospects for promotion, and others who are absolutely convinced that this is a pervasive problem in the ranks, that many service members believe this. Now, these individuals are dedicated to their jobs and determined to progress in their careers. So, not surprisingly, they hesitate in pursuing treatment. Now, of course, I understand that HIPAA prevents medical records from being considered, including those on mental health, with good reason. But we need to be absolutely sure that the fears of our service members do not come to pass in other ways. Now, we need to make explicit that promotion boards are not only prevented from considering medical records, but also information on treatment received by word of mouth, from other areas of personnel files, or in any other form. This will reflect our modern understanding of mental health and addiction issues, that they should be treated, not ignored, and that individuals can overcome them. But I believe, Mr. Chairman, the most important aspect of this amendment, the main reason I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting it, is that we need to be sure that our service members know and are fully aware about these prohibitions. Now, some may argue against this amendment, claiming that it perpetuates a myth, that in fact treatment information is not considered. Their argument perfectly illustrates why this amendment is so necessary, because many service members believe they will be penalized for pursuing treatment. And as long as this is true, we will still have our brave men and women suffer in silence. With screening and counseling, they could get healthy. They could perform their duties at a much higher level. And they could avoid falling into the traps of addiction, domestic violence, and homelessness that await most of our veterans when they return home. Mr. Chairman, I believe that the individuals assigned to the promotion boards have the best interests of the military at heart, and I believe that they do their jobs quite well. The quality of our rank proves just that. But I want to be sure that we do everything possible to remove the stigma on mental health treatment until all service members are comfortable pursuing the treatment that they need. I believe this amendment is an important step in that direction. So thank you, and I hope all of my colleagues will join me in supporting this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim the time in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield 3 minutes to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. I oppose the amendment because it intrudes on the inherent responsibility of commanders to assess the fitness for promotion of service members under their command. As a former president myself of the Mid-Carolina Mental Health Association, I appreciate mental health issues. Our commanders strive to be fair, and the service policies prevent prejudicial consideration of mental health treatment that carries no implications for performance and promotion qualification. This amendment would require our commanders to withhold evidence of behavior that is clearly inconsistent with promotion. I am concerned whether it is even ethical to demand our commanders to ignore such information that they see as a risk to force readiness. A commander must make a recommendation on every individual regarding promotion eligibility. Once aware of facts that would clearly cause a commander to question a service member's fitness for promotion, it would seem impossible for a commander to render a recommendation that supports the member's promotion. It is unfair to ask our commanders to be so disingenuous. The risk is that this amendment would routinely eliminate important factors from the promotion process that will result in the promotion of unqualified members over more deserving members. This provision attempts to replace the commander's judgment with that of an artificial standard that cannot account for the complexity of cases. The role of commanders is pivotal in the promotion systems operated by the armed forces. The nation invests immense trust in our military commanders in the most challenging of circumstances, and we must not betray that trust by limiting their responsibility to choose future leaders. Don't tie the hands of our commanders as they assess their subordinates' fitness for promotion. Continue to put our trust in commanders and defeat this amendment. I urge defeat of the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
I yield, Mr. Chairman, 1 minute to my friend and colleague, member of the committee, gentleman from California, Mr. Hunter.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman from South Carolina, whose oldest son and I served in Iraq together. As a United States Marine, I filled out dozens of evaluations on my Marine. Some I recommended for promotion, some I did not. And as already been said, Mr. Chairman, this amendment must be opposed because it would disrupt the vital role commanders play in the military promotion process. Our commanders are the best prepared to make the difficult judgments that balance the interests of the individuals against the need of the armed forces to promote the most qualified individuals. It is not ethical to ask commanders to overlook information that they believe directly bears on the member's qualification for promotion. Commanders strive to be fair, and current policies prevent prejudicial consideration of mental health treatment that carries no implications for performance and promotion qualification. The provision attempts to replace the commander's judgment with an artificial standard that cannot account for the complexity of cases. The nation invests immense trust in our military commanders in the most challenging of circumstances while leading Marines and soldiers in combat, and we must not betray that trust. I urge defeat of this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
How much time do we have left?
2 minutes.
And the other?
Expired. The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield. One minute left. I yield the balance of our time to the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Heck.
The gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I rise to reluctantly oppose the gentleman from Indiana's amendment, and I applaud his intent of trying to remove the stigma of seeking mental health services in the military. Again, as a physician in the Army Reserves, I've experienced the issues that he's trying to address here this evening. But I also have to agree with my colleagues that have brought up the issues regarding the impact on the commander's ability to make a truthful and honest recommendation for promotion. Having had the honor to command and having had the opportunity to serve on promotion boards, I know that this information is vitally important. It's hard to draw the distinction as to whether or not you're using the information that the person sought care, or was it because of the behavior that that person demonstrated that caused them to seek the care. Nonetheless, that information is vital. When a physical profile, a medical profile form is included in a packet that shows there's a duty restriction, perhaps because of a psychiatric disturbance, it could also be for a generally physical disturbance, that information is taken into consideration when determining whether or not that individual is fit for promotion and the duties that would be assigned subsequent to that promotion. Again, I applaud my colleagues' intent, but I think the answer to this is better education of our service members to rid ourselves of this pervasive misconception than trying to pass this amendment. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California. Gentleman from California.
I yield back the balance for a time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chair, I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana will be postponed. The chair understands that amendment number 22 will not be offered. It is now in order to consider amendment number 24, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk would designate the amendment.
Amendment number 24, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Whitman of Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all know the record of problems at Arlington National Cemetery, and we know the current leadership there has made significant progress in fixing that system. But my concern with Arlington is not with the professionals and leaders who have turned Arlington around and worked tirelessly to ensure the fallen members of our all-volunteer force, our veterans and their families, are treated with the respect, reverence, and honor they deserve. My concern is that the scandals and embarrassment that rocked Arlington National Cemetery went largely unprosecuted for one reason. No one of the former civilian directors in the former chain of command at Arlington was held accountable for their actions and their gross negligence and mismanagement, because none of them were subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Additionally, Arlington is managed by the Army and rests adjacent to a joint military base. Tenants of that command work on that base daily. With that, I believe strongly that we need to have a military leader now in charge of Arlington National Cemetery. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Who seeks recognition? In the gentleman from Florida. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I rise to reluctantly oppose the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
On the 10th of June of 2010, the Secretary of the Army, former member of this body, John McHugh, appointed Catherine Condon, a former high-ranking senior civilian Army official with a strong management background, as the first executive director of the Army National Cemeteries program. There is every indication that she is qualified and well-suited for the post. The Army created the new position to oversee Arlington's National Cemetery and Soldiers' Home National Cemetery as a result of the problems that's been discussed by my friend and colleague, Mr. Whitman. In its initial recommendations, the Army did not state that the newly created executive director position should be filled by a military official, and since that time has not provided any rationale stating why a military official would be better suited for this position rather than a civilian with credentials like Ms. Condon. This amendment would establish the military chain of command, requiring the executive director of the Army cemetery programs be a commissioned officer, replacing the current civilian in that position. Army oversight over the cemetery program remains very strong by virtue of the fact that Ms. Condon reports directly to the Secretary of the Army. There is every indication today that Ms. Condon has performed her duties in a competent and effective manner. All IG and advisory committee reports show that significant progress at Arlington has been made under her leadership. Ms. Condon's status as a civilian does not affect the overall authority of the Army over the program or any aspect of the operations under her care. I note that the Secretary of the Army, Secretary McHugh, wrote a strong letter of opposition to this amendment for the reasons that I've just addressed, and I would urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I'd like to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. West.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also, Chairman Whitman. And I do rise to support this amendment. Having spent time in the military, we were taught that there were some basic principles, and a couple of those basic principles are unity of command and unity of effort. I would take nothing away from the civilian appointee that we have in this position currently, but as we said, this is the Army National Cemetery. And it being the Army National Cemetery, I feel that it is very important that we have a chain of command, a chain of leadership that could fall under the Military District of Washington. As a matter of fact, the Sergeant Major of the Military District of Washington is someone that I served with at Fort Bragg, North Carolina when I was a young major. And we understand chain of command. We understand responsibility and accountability. And I talked to him about this, and he feels that that would be something that would be very well appropriate for to have a military commissioned officer. When you look at our arsenals, you know, our arsenals out there have strong civilian leadership and also strong civilian employees, but yet we have a military commander. When you look at an organization such as the Army Material Command, which is some 60 to 70% civilian, but yet we have a four-star general, General Ann Dunwoody, who's someone that I also know very well and serve with, is in charge of that organization. So I think if we want to make sure that we have the right type of unity of command, unity of effort, chain of command in place, we need to make sure that we have a uniformed military person that's in control of this and in command of this Army National Cemetery. Thank you, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield a minute and a half to my distinguished colleague from the state of California, Mr. Hunter.
The gentleman from California is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the gentleman from Virginia and the gentleman from Florida. I'd like to start by talking about what this means to me. This is about accountability, responsibility, and authority. All of these leadership themes are well defined throughout the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But a civilian team does not protect the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. That's the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment that has the responsibility to honor our fallen comrades and conduct ceremonies and special events to represent the U.S. Army. One of the most known tasks of this unit is the distinguished charge of guarding the tomb of the unknown at Arlington National Cemetery, which it has done with honor since July of 1937. Again, this is a military unit. It's not a civilian unit. Many of our fallen heroes who were killed in action choose to be buried in Arlington. Home to our nation's military history, the men and women who sacrificed to make this country what it is today. The current chain of command under the Department of the Army has the civilian executive director of the Army National Cemeteries reporting directly to the Secretary of the Army. Nowhere in the current chain of command does there exist a uniformed military officer of appropriate rank with commensurate command authority, accountability, and responsibility who is subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If we are only going to have one major national cemetery that is run by a branch of the DOD, then there needs to be a uniform chain of command that runs the cemetery in a professional military manner. And in closing, I would state, Mr. Chairman, I have friends that may choose to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and I would urge adoption of this amendment.
What purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I would like to ask the sponsor of the amendment if he has any more speakers.
I do. I'm going to have myself as the last.
You will close.
Yes, I will close.
And he has the right to close.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
With that, then I would yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, floor to yield
with that, thank you. You know, as you've heard, this issue is really about this. It's about making sure that there's accountability and that there's responsibility at this nation's most distinguished resting place, where our heroes that have defended this nation go for their final resting place. If we put a uniformed officer in command of Arlington National Cemetery, then that officer will be held accountable to the exact same standards as the heroes buried at Arlington once were. That is the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The men and women of our all-volunteer force who fall in combat and those who serve and who choose to be buried at Arlington deserve the honor of having a uniformed commanding officer to watch over them as they rest, to set and enforce a standard of military excellence and commitment, honor and integrity that only those serving in uniform can fully comprehend. Folks, these are our nation's heroes. We owe them nothing less, especially in light of the problems that we've had there at Arlington. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to put back in place the distinction and the honor deserved by our men and women that have so honorably served this nation.
Time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 26, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 26, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Cummings of Maryland.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored today to be joined by the ranking members of the Committee on Veterans Affairs and the Committee on Armed Services in offering an amendment to provide urgently needed help to service members, veterans, and their families. When Congress passed Service Members Civil Relief Act, one of its many goals was to protect our men and women in uniform from being foreclosed upon while they are on active duty serving our nation abroad. Under current law, some of the protections in the Act are scheduled to sunset at the end of this year. Unless Congress acts now, our service members could be placed at greater risk. Our amendment fixes that by eliminating the sunset provision and ensuring that foreclosure protections are extended for 12 months. In addition, our amendment ensures that soldiers serving in contingency operations do not have to worry about losing their homes regardless of when they were purchased. Our amendment also extends foreclosure protections to surviving spouses of service members who are killed in the line of duty. And our amendment extends foreclosure protections to veterans who are 100% disabled at the time of discharges due to injuries they received during their service. Finally, the amendment prohibits banks from discriminating against service members covered by the Act, and it increases penalties against banks to deter future violations. We crafted this amendment after more than a year of investigating cases in which service members suffered illegal foreclosures. We heard directly from these service members, veterans, banks, and government officials at multiple hearings and forums in both the House and Senate. I also issued a staff report detailing how several mortgage servicing companies have now conceded that they violated the Act. Frankly, this amendment should be a no-brainer. Every member of this chamber should be able to agree that our troops fighting overseas should not also have to fight here at home just to keep a roof over their heads and over the heads of their families. Our amendment is supported by the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and Disabled American Veterans, all of whom have written letters of support. We owe it to our men and women in uniform to take action now, and this amendment provides common sense protections to those who deserve them most. I ask that you vote in favor of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
And I do rise in opposition, but not in strong opposition, because I agree with what the gentleman from Maryland is attempting to do, but I need to oppose it for several reasons. First, the Service Members Civil Relief Act is designed to strike a balance between the needs of a service member and their civilian obligations, and I don't believe that anybody in this body would ever do something that could make life more difficult for them. The changes to SCRA made by this amendment are worthy of vetting under regular order through the Committee on Veterans Affairs. Currently, real estate protections apply to purchases made before being called to active duty. However, Section A.3 of the amendment would extend coverage to real estate purchased at any time, including while on active duty under certain circumstances. That section alone makes a significant change to a provision that is over 70 years old. And while I don't necessarily oppose such an extension, we need to get the views of the major stakeholders, including the VA and the home mortgage industry. Secondly, as written, some provisions are open to very wide interpretation. For example, there is a provision that provides a 12-month protection from foreclosure to those who are separated or retired because of a disability and rated by VA as permanently and totally disabled. Since it's very rare that a service member would actually leave the military with a 100% rating from the VA, and the VA adjudication process, as most of us know, can take months, if not years in some cases, how would this provision be implemented? And that is left unclear in this amendment. For example, would a bank be required to give back a foreclosed home if the veteran was found several years later to be rated as totally and permanently disabled? The amendment also contains a significant increase in penalties for violating SCRA provisions. And again, while I don't necessarily oppose the change, I think we need to hear from the legal community on these provisions. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time.
I yield one. First of all, may I inquire how much time we have, Mr. Chairman?
The gentlemen on both sides have 2.5 minutes.
I want to yield a minute and a half to the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment. I think Mr. Miller raises some justifiable concerns about how much we're going to need to look into this further as we go forward. I believe we can be committed to doing that in conference and have that conversation. But the biggest reason to pass this is because of the first thing it does, and that extends the current law that is set to expire for service members who are deployed, not being foreclosed. We have passed it in this chamber, has not passed in the Senate. If we put this into the defense authorizing bill, it gives us another bite at the apple, another chance to make sure this passes without being sunsetted. And then the other provisions, I think, are worthy expansions of the protection. Now, just so we're clear, it doesn't expand it forever, so that someone who's 100% service disabled would never be foreclosed upon. It merely gives the judge greater discretion to prohibit that foreclosure as long as justice would require, which I think is good protection for people who are 100% service disabled, for surviving spouses, and for the others that are added to this. I think there is cause to further vet this. I personally pledge to work with the majority as we go forward to do that, but I think the amendment is worthy of support because of how important this issue is. Thank you.
I continue to reserve them.
Gentleman reserves. For purposes, gentleman from Florida rise.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the ranking member drawing to attention the fact that this is bottled up in the Senate, even though it has passed the House in regards to the extending of the sunset provisions of the SCRA. I would say that to confirm our concerns, my staff actually talked with an expert on SCRA who was the author of the 2003 major revisions, and here were some of his concerns. There's nothing that mandates that a deployed service member give notice to their deployment to the financial institution without this information. How will the institution know that the service member is now covered by these new protections under SCRA? The current website that financial institutions use to see if somebody is on active duty does not differentiate between deployed and non-deployed, thereby making it extremely difficult for the financial institution to keep track. What is going to be the duration of the protections for the surviving spouse, which is something Mr. Smith just brought up, and a disabled veteran? Indefinitely? He says no. But will institutions be discouraged from making loans to service members because of this potential problem? If we believe that we should expand this protection to mortgages, why not extend the protections to other areas? These are the type of complex questions that really should be thought out and reviewed by experts on this area under regular order. That is why we have committees in this process. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In reference to the argument about the deployment and notice, the Department of Defense has a long-standing database in place that lenders currently utilize to access this information, and I think that that would be sufficient with regard to that. The question that the gentleman raises, Mr. Miller, is a very good one with regard to the 100% disability. The amendment I've offered does not include those rated 100% disabled after multiple appeals. It only applies to those rated 100% disabled at the time of discharge. And you're probably right. It won't be with so many people. Gentleman, yield.
I believe it says rated by VA. DOD makes a rating when you separate from service, and it says VA, and that is a problem because of the time that it takes for